Welcome, everyone. We're going to go over some important details today, but we want you to know, and what we hope you're here to learn about, is that while serving a significantly higher portion of students of color, Career Pathways in Oregon eliminated the opportunity/achievement gap among participants. Today, we're going to discuss implementation that creates results, as well as how Oregon pioneered a career pathways data system capable of measuring completion rates and improving outcomes for students. And as we're getting started, we want to acknowledge that there are both upsides and some downsides presenting in this format. The obvious upside is that you can participate whenever you want. Maybe it's your lunch break or you finally got a free moment. And look at you learning about Career Pathways delivery data and outcomes on your time. A+. But this format does mean that we can't answer your questions in the moment. But we are available. We're going to provide our email addresses again at the end of today's presentation. But we want you to know that we're excited to hear from you and engage your questions or feedback. Connect on LinkedIn, whatever works for you. So please do feel free to reach out to any and all of us if we can help. Let's start with Kristen Kulongoski, who's going to talk a little bit about the history of Career Pathways in Oregon.
Thank you, Dan. And welcome. As Dan mentioned, I'm Kristen Kulongoski. I'm the manager of the Adult Basic Skills and Career Pathways programs at Mount Hood Community College in Gresham, Oregon. And to better understand Oregon's results, so where we are today, it's important to recognize the history of Career Pathways in Oregon, so the work and the commitment that's really gotten us here. I'm going to highlight three key aspects to the evolution of Career Pathways in Oregon, including the context and systemic nature of Career Pathways, the strong collaboration between the state and both the community college and adult education systems, and the consistent and long-term investments in career pathways at both the state and local levels. So Career Pathways really began as a systemic effort in Oregon 17 years ago in 2004, when a team of advisors from the governor's office, officials from state agencies, such as higher ed, K-12, economic development, health and human services, came together along with community college leaders and joined 8 other states in participating in a National Governors Association Academy to assess and change state policies that were barriers to working adults accessing and earning post-secondary credentials. So this initiative was really critical in creating the foundation that we've built on for the last almost 20 years, because it prioritized the need for more trained workers for middle skill occupations, so those jobs that require more than a high school degree but less than a 4-year degree, and it focused implementation at 2 levels, a state level and at a local community college level, and throughout all of our adult basic skills programs in the state. So between 2004 and 2007, Oregon Career Pathways expanded in multiple ways. So first, Career Pathways implementation grew from an initial 5 community colleges in 2004 to all 17 community colleges by 2007. And although the efforts were varied in how they did their work, all of the community colleges focused on a key transition to higher education, whether it was K-12, adult education, pre-college, or even 2-year to 4-year. And second, as a result of participating in the academy, the state began to look at its policies initially around need-based financial aid programs, making changes to reduce the barriers for working adults, part-time students, and families. And third, that academy really helped forge the partnerships that we have today. So the partnerships that we have today were really strengthened at multiple levels, particularly among the Workforce Investment Act and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And some important examples of those partnerships that were built that really laid that foundation for career pathways. The Oregon Community College President's Council signed a career pathways resolution affirming the community college's commitment to career pathways, and again, throughout all 17 community colleges. The state funded a career pathways coordinator position for 15 years to help oversee and work with colleges and state agencies to build the system. And the Oregon Pathways Alliance was formed, and that included representatives from all 17 community colleges, convening up to 4 times a year to really share local practices and discuss system strategies for advancing career pathways as we move forward. And finally, the State Board of Education formalized career pathways in their administrative regulations by approving the Oregon Career Pathways Certificate of Completion. And this formalized, again, Career Pathways credential that was awarded by and still is by community colleges for students who meet specific technical skill proficiencies and other state standards. But I think one of the keys to that credential is that the credential includes 12 to 44 credits. So really advancing a student, an individual along both their education and career path. So all 4 of these examples were really possible because of the collaboration that was built between state agencies, community college leaders, and local program staff. And the last key element in the evolution of career pathways in Oregon is the long-term investment of resources in career pathways. And those have been provided over 17 years, again, starting with the Workforce Investment Act and continuing with WIOA. Over the last almost 20 years, the state has invested resources in career pathways through the Employer Workforce Training Fund, our WIOA Title I-B Perkins Post-Secondary Leadership and Workforce Adult Dislocated Worker, and then also our Title II Adult Education and Family Literacy grants. And finally, the Community College Strategic Fund has been instrumental in funding local efforts for career pathways. And for the last 8 biennia, the Oregon Community College President's Council and the Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development have provided the strategic funds to really incent the development of career pathways across the state at all community colleges. So now fast forward 15 years, it's 2019, and we have a very strong foundation in place. Oregon has been able to really focus the last 4 years on advancing career pathways and taking that to the next step. So career pathways are still offered at all 17 community colleges. And although the local efforts still vary, collectively, they all cover those key transitions to post-secondary education. So the last 4 years have been a really critical time for us in a number of ways. One, we have reaffirmed our commitment and definition for career pathways, which we saw on a previous slide. And some of the key points about that definition are that our career pathways align with local priorities and labor market needs. They are required to have multiple entry and exit points. They're stackable. They include wraparound support services and employment assistance and preparation. Also, over the last 4 years, our Career Pathways Initiative has really focused on expanding access and equity through new partnerships, new funding, with new programs that are coming out, such as Pathways to Opportunity, our STEP SNAP program, and of course, our WIOA Title II IET and IELCE programs. We've broadened those partnerships, the funding through all of those programs, to really move and expand career pathways again across the state, not just in community colleges, but with our partners in other agencies. And finally, which Dan is going to talk about next, is that we've really focused the last 4 years on identifying a data collection and reporting process to measure both the quantitative and qualitative successes of career pathways. So we really want to tell our story, and we can't do that without accurate data. So Dan is next, and he's going to talk a little bit about why and how we got started working on career pathway data in the first place. Dan.
Thanks so much, Kristen. So there were some challenges that we were aware of by 2017 that we began trying to solve for in the biennium 2017-19 and biennium 2019-2021. One of them was, despite the fact that the grant had been going out for more than a decade, we still weren't sure how many career pathway students we were serving. We also weren't sure, because we didn't know how many students we were serving and who those students were, we weren't sure what percent of career pathway students were completing a certificate once they began. So as the previous slide mentioned, in Oregon, we have 17 independently run community colleges. So when some mid-level bureaucrat from the state like me shows up saying, we're going to create a data system, isn't this fun? There can be some questions about how the data will be used. Not in Oregon, of course. There was no suspicion in Oregon, obviously. This is purely hypothetical. So one of the first questions we had to answer before we had buy-in was, but what are you going to do with the data? So I used this exact slide over and over when I met with participants in the data pilot that we designed. We aren't doing accountability here. That is not what these data are going to be used for. What we're doing is data-informed decision-making. We need good data to understand how our career pathways programs are performing for students. And assuring and collaborating with the 17 independent community colleges was really important. The nature of that collaboration mattered a lot, and coming back over and over to the fact that what we were trying to do was provide those grant administrators with the data they needed to improve their programs for their students was a critical part of that messaging. So I mentioned the career pilot data, or the career pathways data pilot. There are a few important things to know about the career pathways data pilot. The first and most relevant is we had no budget. There's no money to develop the data system. As you'll see, the technical work was done by the State of Oregon's Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development within the Higher Education Coordinating Commission. And Kelly Zink is that person. She's going to talk about her amazing work here in a few minutes. What we had was all 17 grant recipients agreed to hold $25,000 of the $2 million grant in reserve to incentivize participation in data pilot work. And in the end, 10 of the 17 grant recipients opted in. So participating schools are each going to receive a stipend of $2,500. That was intended to basically cover travel. So what I want to communicate here is we built this entire data system for $25,000 total, and even that wasn't new money injected into the system. That was an agreement among the 17 grant recipients that this was important enough to withhold just a little bit of money from the total to incentivize participation by individual schools. So I touched on this earlier, but this is the basic challenge we were facing in Oregon when I was hired in 2017. We knew who was earning career pathway certificates, and we had accurate data regarding race, ethnicity, employment rates, even earnings outcomes. But because we didn't know who was starting career pathways, we were unable to say what portion of students who began a career pathway completed one, and we were even unable to say how many students we were serving. So the fundamental problem we would solve for through the data pilot was who began career pathways. Here's what we knew. The data in the 17 colleges, independent colleges, student information systems probably weren't accurate enough to build an build an accurate data system around. Most of you will know this, but career pathway students in particular have incentives to mask their intentions. So if a career pathway student wants just a short-term certificate and declares, I just want a short-term certificate, they're not Pell eligible. But if a student just wants a short-term certificate and declares that they're here for an AAS, then they become Pell eligible. So there's an incentive, particularly for career pathway students, to maybe mask their intentions. And so that the information in the student's information system about declared major or declared intent is likely to be incorrect. So we had a series of conversations about this, and what we decided was to adopt a behavior-based approach that reflects the career pathways framework. So, excuse me, if a student received intentional student support and attended a CTE course beyond the drop date, such that they owed money for the course, then by fiat, we declared them a career pathway student. And we talk about this as turning two keys. So behaviorally, if a student turns the first key and receives intentional student support and turns a second key, and that's not subsequent, it's just if they ever turn both of those keys, then they are a career pathway student. And so while much of the work through the data pilot was manual, this structure allows us, at least in theory, to automate this system moving forward. So there it is. Now that we know who is a career pathway student and we know who's earning the certificates, we have what we need to calculate the completion rate for career pathway students, so that students who turn both keys will end up in the denominator, and then those students who have turned both keys who go on to earn a certificate will show up in the numerator. Kelly Zink is going to discuss some of the technical aspects of designing this system.
Thank you, Dan. Welcome, everyone. My name is Kelly Zink. I'm the Education Team Research Analyst at the State Higher Education Coordinating Commission, Office of Community Colleges and Workforce Development. So once we figured out who to include on the student file, those students who turned both of those keys, we had some technical challenges come up. The first being getting data entered correctly on the student file. So we provided training and technical assistance to the programs. We used a sample student file and we developed a data dictionary. So we used those two things to provide guidance on which fields were required and which were optional. And also the format for the start date for each student. And the start date was really important because that was used to determine completion time. The second challenge that came up was removing students who couldn't possibly finish in time. So even if a student turned both of those keys, they may not have been included in the final analysis. Some students were removed from the final analysis if the start term and the 150% of normal time to completion hadn't yet come to pass. So in other words, if the completion time calculated from the start term wasn't before the last time the state database was updated, then the student was removed from the analysis, so they wouldn't count against the program. The third challenge was returning an analysis that was usable to programs. So there were a few different iterations of the file that were returned to programs after the analysis. And in working with programs, we concluded that it was helpful for them to have all of the information that was originally submitted to the state, and then add the completion analysis onto that. That way, programs could look up individual students and compare notes on completions. The fourth challenge was aligning systems and timelines. The state completions database is updated once a year in September. So we needed to decide on a reporting and an analysis schedule that worked around this constraint. And this is related to removing students who couldn't possibly finish in time. So if a student started after the last database update, then they were removed from that final analysis because we wouldn't have their completion on file in the database. And so reporting and analysis will happen in the fall, and we will analyze the completion rates of students who started the previous year. For example, this October, we will be analyzing the completion rates of students who started in program year 2020-21 and had time to finish their program after considering the 150% of normal time to completion. Next, Dan will discuss some of the limitations to this research.
If you're here, you're probably interested in outcomes for career pathways. So you would know that anecdotally, we've heard for years that career pathways are serving a different student population than community colleges as a whole. And we've heard that the overwhelming majority of career pathway students complete a certificate. So it's important to acknowledge that there are some limitations to what these data can tell us today. But I do want to emphasize that because the data reinforce messages we've heard about career pathways for more than a decade now, there's good reason to believe that these initial data are at least directionally correct, even if individual numbers might fluctuate a couple points up or down as more and more data continue to come into the system. As Kelly said, we're going to rerun this very soon, and I'm excited to see what the new numbers look like. So we began by looking at who started a career pathway. That is, who turned both of those keys. What we found is that more than half of career pathway students self-identify as students of color, and that career pathway students are more than twice as likely to self-identify as students of color than community college students as a whole. So again, this is reinforcing what we heard anecdotally, that career pathways are serving a different student population in Oregon than do community colleges as a whole statewide. The next question we asked was, how many career pathway students eventually complete something? And what we found is that almost 7 out of 10 career pathway students will eventually go on to earn a certificate. And the last question we asked of those initial data was, given the student population served by career pathways, is there an opportunity or achievement gap? And at least in these initial data, the answer is a resounding no. The most important finding to date is that while serving a significantly higher portion of students of color, career pathways has eliminated the opportunity and achievement gap among participants. And we're accomplishing all this on an annual budget of $1 million spent strategically across 17 community colleges statewide. Don't worry, in 3 slides, Kristen's gonna give you an example of how all of this is done. So stay tuned. Remember this slide? I told you I used it over and over again, and here we are again. I include this slide again because we meant it. This really did guide our work. We weren't just trying to measure how programs were performing. We also wanted to improve outcomes for career pathway students by making the programs better. And we have. There was a community college in our data pilot that had a rule that students needed to pass 15 credits to receive a certificate. And because of this rule, there were a handful of students who had earned all 14 credits in an approved welding certificate, but had not received their awards because the certificate approved by the state at 14 credits didn't meet the college's standard of having 15 credits in order to receive a certificate. So after a deep dive into these initial data, the community college identified the problem and came up with both a short-term solution for the handful of affected students so that they got their certificate, and a long-term solution so that this wouldn't happen again to students who did everything they were asked but didn't receive a certificate because of a college policy. So it's working. We know that the certificates are serving their students well, and we can improve the delivery of the programs by providing useful information back to program administrators. Kelly is next, and she's going to talk about the future of career pathways data work in Oregon.
Yeah, so what's next for career pathways analysis in Oregon? First, we're working to include employment analysis for completers, which would involve sharing data with the Oregon Employment Department. We'd like to analyze employment rates for completers, for example, second quarter and fourth quarter after completion. And also we'd like to include the median wage. We'd like to add this analysis to what we currently have to help determine the return on investment for career pathways credentials. And we'd also like to run analysis incorporating the guided pathways early momentum metrics. These are evidence-based metrics that are being used to study the early impact of guided pathways implementation. These metrics include credit, gateway course, and persistence measures. And ideally, we'd like to be able to report these same metrics for career pathways students in Oregon, because we believe career pathways students do at least as well as guided pathways students school-wide. Now, Kristen will show us an example of how career pathways is implemented in Oregon.
Thanks, Kelly. As I mentioned earlier, career pathways implementation looks really different at every community college in Oregon. And I'm going to share with you how Mount Hood Community College, what our approach to community college, or what our approach to career pathways is. And I think it's important to note that Mount Hood Community Colleges was one of 3 community colleges that really started exploring career pathways in 1999. So we've been at this for over 20 years. But as Daniel mentioned, at a statewide investment of $1 million a year across 17 community colleges, that's not very much money. So how do we do this? I'm going to talk a little bit about our model, our focus, and then what we're looking at for our future. So I think one of the most important components of our approach at Mount Hood Community College is that our model is really based on a partnership between our Adult Basic Skills program, funded by general fund, community college dollars, as well as receiving our federal WIOA Title II funds from the state, and our WorkSource Gresham office, our employment office, that program that receives the WIOA Title I-B funds, and then a variety of community partners, and then our career technical education programs at the community colleges, at the community college. And what you'll find is that of all the services that our model encompasses, each one of those partners provides different elements. So not just one provider providing all of those services, but each one of our partners provides a different set of those services. And our focus really is on adult basic skills students, primarily non-native speakers of English, students who've tested below the college level in reading and or math, and students finishing their GED. So all of our programs are designed to support adult basic skills students, and therefore we really work hard to offer our programs in a cohort model where students can really build those relationships among their peers, develop study skills and support strategies among their cohort. And it's working so far at Mount Hood. So let me share with you a little bit more about our model and our programs. So we have 7 programs right now, 6 of which are specifically focused on non-native speakers of English. And I think an important policy note is that, as I mentioned, because we focus on an adult basic skills population and students may not be testing and completing their prerequisites for these programs, the college has waived the prerequisites for reading, writing, and math for our students. who are taking part in our career pathway program so that students can accelerate their learning and obtaining credentials without having to jump through, all of those initial hoops to meet reading, writing, and math requirements before they can even get into the program. Because our model provides a parallel support in language and basic skill development at the same time students are taking those credit technical ed classes, they're building those basic skills at the same time they're meeting those credit requirements. All right, so over the last 7 years, we've served almost 450 students. And a comparison would be that in Oregon, 27% of community college students are students of color, while in our career pathway programs, 80% of students are students of color. And in Oregon, 45% of community college students are over the age of 25, while 65% of our career pathway students are over the age of 25. So what do our outcomes look like? I think an important note about our outcomes are that all of our career pathway programs result in either an industry recognized credential or a certificate of completion, a career pathway certificate of completion. We have one program where students finish the program and get both. And then the other piece of our program in terms of outcomes are that all of our programs result in some level of credit earned that articulates directly into finishing a 2-year degree program. So where are we headed in the future? I think a couple of avenues that many of you have probably already heard of and are exploring yourselves. We're really interested in looking at pre-apprenticeship programs for adult basic skills students, and we'll be building out a construction pre-apprenticeship program for non-native English speakers over the next year. We're also looking at some new sector and occupational areas based on need in our community. And then the third area that we're really focusing on for the future is looking at our existing career pathways and figuring out how do we build out those additional entry and exit points so that students have an opportunity to come back and continue in the program to advance both their career and their educational attainment. And the visual you see here is one example that we've been working on for the last year and are implementing this year with 3 new steps in our early childhood education program for non-native speakers of English. So next, we are going to hear from some career pathway students at Chemeketa Community College in Salem, Oregon.
This program has made a huge impact on my life. It has helped me gain knowledge. It has helped me be a better person, be a better teacher. It has helped me in so many ways, even in my career, what I want to be and what I am.
I learned so much from this program. As a mom, I have 3 children. I would say that I would have known how children develop, but no. Little I knew about how is the impact of a child's development. So now I can have a good conversation with them because I can understand how they feel now. And before it wasn't like that. I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't. And that's one of the things that it made a huge impact on my life personally with my family.
It was a big challenge. It was like getting all that work done because it's like a whole semester in like 5 weeks, but it was worth it.
Finishing the program is to going forward. Keep going to school, finish my associate, and hoping to be a teacher in the future.
Trying to finish off my associates. That's what's next. and probably after that, a bachelor's and a master's.
And not only was just the program itself and learning, I would say that each one of us that was in the program, we became more than just a program. We became more together as a family. We see each other, and we always say, keep going forward because you have more to give.
It changes your life in the form that it gets you where you want to be. It gives you the knowledge, it gives you the help. It's a very good program.
When I see that video, I usually just need to hold for a second, take a deep breath. Thanks so much to Adam Menig and the Career Pathways team at Chemeketa Community College for creating and sharing that video. I can't even tell you how many times that video has made me cry. That's it. That's the final message we wanted to share about the impact of Oregon's investment in career pathways. As Susanna said better than we ever could, it changes your life. It gets you where you want to be. So thank you. We want to reiterate that we welcome your feedback and questions. Please feel free to reach out to any and all of us using the email addresses provided. Thank you so much.